On behalf of the Board of Directors and the Executive Leadership Team of Port Metro Vancouver, I welcome you to the 2015 Annual General Meeting. My name is Pam Ryan, and it is my pleasure and privilege to help moderate today's proceedings. Before I begin, if I could ask everyone to set your phones to silent or vibrate, whichever you prefer, we'll get started. We meet today in the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people. And for this year's event, we've returned to a venue with a view that offers awe-inspiring perspectives of Port Metro Vancouver's waters. A working harbour, an enviable playground, a sustainable gateway, and I'm sure there's many more. It's been a busy year for Port Metro Vancouver, and I think that shows in the turnout for today's event. And again, thank you all for being here. Special guests, thank you very much also, and I will leave that to Board Chair Craig Neeser to introduce as part of his formal remarks in just a few moments. As always, we have a full agenda, and we want to leave as much time as possible for the question and answer portion of today's event, but we have a number of business activities that we need to conclude in advance. And with this in mind, I will offer a few remarks about the format for today's event, and then I will hand things over to Mr. Neeser for the first part of the meeting. Firstly, though, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Neeser and Port Metro Vancouver's executive team, who I will ask to stand as I acknowledge. Craig Neeser, Chair of the Board. Robin Sylvester, President and Chief Executive Officer. Alan Bidala, Chief Financial Officer, whose portfolio includes business planning, legal and corporate secretariat, and information services. In front, Cliff Stewart, Vice President of Infrastructure, leading major capital projects and trade areas, including Roberts Bank Terminal 2. Duncan Wilson, Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility, and Duncan leads environment, communications, government relations, community and Aboriginal engagement. Sandra Case, Vice President of Human Resources and Labor Relations. Tom Corsi, Vice President of Real Estate, responsible for real estate management, asset engineering, and maintenance activities. And Peter Izada, Vice President of Planning and Operations, responsible for land and marine operations and security, planning, trade development, and customer engagement initiatives. Today's agenda is as follows. Mr. Neeser will speak to the global supply chain and Port Metro Vancouver's in our everyday lives, and Port Metro Vancouver's leadership in facilitating that. Mr. Sylvester will then provide an overview of 2014, including highlights and today's priorities. Mr. Bidala will present the financial report, and then Mr. Sylvester will close again with closing remarks and a short video. At about 3:50, we will have a 45-minute question and answer session, during which you will have the opportunity to ask questions of the board chair and the executive. During that portion of today's session, we're offering 3 ways in which you can participate. From the standing mic that will be available for those who wish to ask your questions verbally, and we do ask that verbal questions be kept to no more than 2 minutes, so that we can allow as many people as possible who wish to participate. For comment cards, which you should have on your seat, or they're also being handed out. If you need one, you can raise your hand, and one of the community relations team will hand one to you. You can write your comment and hand it back to them, and we'll bring it up to the front and I'll read it out. We also have an interactive mobile site. Those of you who were here last year may be familiar with it, and you can ask your questions on this tool, and you can also vote for questions by others. And there is a full list of instructions along with your agenda, which was on your chair. Any questions that we don't get to today, the written questions we'll be posting on Port Talk with the answers in the coming weeks. And for those of you who may not be aware, Port Talk is Port Metro Vancouver's online engagement portal, and it's at www.porttalk.ca. We kindly ask that you hold your questions until that portion of the agenda. Let's wait till all of the presentations are complete, and we open up the mic for questions. You may find even that some of your questions are actually addressed in some of the presentations that our presenters will make. You are welcome to submit your written questions at any time, and we'll be collecting those and addressing them at that portion of the day. If possible, please keep your questions short and to the point. This will help to ensure we address as many as possible and within the allotted time frame that we have, and we'll keep to that 45-minute time frame. And finally, please be advised that Port Metro Vancouver staff are not participating in any of the question and answer questions or answers, or even voting on any of the questions through the online tool. We do have a small team of people who are helping me to manage the questions, and they will group similar questions and will remove any duplicates if there are any. But we will address those questions in order, and we'll rotate. I'll go open mic, online, and then a written comment for as long as there is an even number. I will provide more information about how we're going to do that when I get to that portion of the session. And for now, it is my pleasure to introduce Craig Neeser, Chair of Port Metro Vancouver's Board of Directors. Craig.
Thank you, Pam. I hope you can all hear me okay. Pam, you started crisply at 3 o'clock, and shipping on time is a good place for all of us at Port Metro Vancouver to start. So good afternoon, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for the annual general meeting of the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, doing business as Port Metro Vancouver. Pam mentioned this, but I'd like to repeat and a little detail. I would like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples, and more particularly the ancestral lands of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. Again, my name is Craig Neeser, and I chair the Board of Directors for Port Metro Vancouver. It's a distinct pleasure to see so many familiar faces and recognize varying interests and activities. I thank you for joining us today, and I notice a couple of former board members here. Thank you, good to see you here, and former Chairman George Adams I saw earlier as well. So great to see some former board members and people from our board. In a few minutes, Robin Sylvester will address the group and talk about some key accomplishments and an overview of last year. As Pam mentioned, Alan Baydella will cover some key statistics and financial information. But first, I'd like to share a bit of information and introduce our board and talk about some highlights and some things that I find interesting in my life living here in Vancouver. On behalf of all Canadians, our Port Authority is a steward of the harbor and the rivers within our jurisdiction. Too often we think of the port as us, and I'd like today to think a little bit about the port being all of us. Yes, we are a federally mandated operation. We are here to facilitate Canada's trade and provide protection for the environment and regard for our local communities. And again, our local communities. Again, our port. To govern such a multifaceted entity requires a diverse and strong board of directors. As set out by the Canada Marine Act, we have 11 board members, and they're appointed as follows. We have one rep from the federal government. We have one rep from the British Columbia government. We have a rep from the 3 prairie provinces of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. We have a rep on behalf of all the municipalities that we work in here in Vancouver. The remainder of the board is federally appointed based on nominations made by the Port Users Group or the nominating committee. Our board has extensive business experience and business expertise. We represent and consider a broad spectrum of interests in our communities, and together we provide a full range of perspectives on issues. I am pleased now to have the opportunity to introduce our board of directors. I would ask that you'd please hold your applause till all have been introduced, and I'd ask the board to please stand until we're all standing. I'd first introduce our vice chair, Mr. Eugene Kwan. Anne Bancroft-Jones, Tim Chapman, Satnam Johal, Carol Kerfoot, Paul Landry, Carmen Loberg, Tom Longworth, Penny Pretty, and Richard Turner, who is not able to be with us this afternoon. And again, my name, Craig Neeser, Chair of the Board. Before any applause, I would like to recognize the tremendous effort of this group, the time that they put in, the guidance that they provide to all of us here in our port, Port Metro Vancouver. Each of you embrace this complex role. You remain steadfast in your long-term sustainable vision for our nation's largest port, our port, and again, I'm grateful to each of you. Thank you. You'll hear through the remarks and the video of others today about record volumes and shipment forecasts that continue to grow. We are in a growing nation, and we're in a growing port. As an exporting nation, many of you and us are familiar with many of the commodities and the resources we export, such as forest products, grain, minerals. I started thinking a little bit about, as this speech was somewhat prepared for me, about my life prior to working in the port. I grew up in Alberta. I spent 25 years in that great province. I saw a lot of things going on. My father worked in the oil industry. All of my uncles and aunts and my wife family were farmers, and saw a lot of grain and agricultural products loading on rail cars and trucks and going somewhere. I saw a lot of minerals, oil products, loading on various vessels, pipelines, and going somewhere. I think a lot of us in Alberta, perhaps the prairies, perhaps the entire country, took for granted they just went somewhere and went to market, and that all happened on its own. So kind of keep that in mind for a minute. And then I came to British Columbia, and I worked in the forest industry for over 30 years. I was lucky to live on the coast, and I started thinking about that too. I thought about the port seemed to play a huge part in my life, and I may not have known it. I worked in plywood, paper products, pulp, specialty wood products, and all the time I was doing that, all of our products went somewhere to global markets. I left Vancouver and visited China or Hong Kong or Japan, South America, various places where our products arrived. I'm not sure I really thought about the role the port played in the export of those specialty products. The port took away all of our products, and our businesses ran. I'm not sure, but I think a lot of us took that for granted. I never really tied my job to our port. I never really thought about the house that I lived in being tied to our port. Again, I think I might have taken it for granted. But let's hope none of us take for granted the 100,000 jobs today that are tied directly to your port. Our port trades $180 billion of goods every year. That's a big number, $180 billion. Today and every day of the year, $500 million of goods will go through the Port of Vancouver. It's a big deal. Yeah, my job and those 100,000 jobs are dependent on our port, but they're dependent on our port to operate safely, to operate sustainably, and operate efficiently. I don't think any one of us want to take any of that safety, efficiency, or sustainability, or those jobs, or those families for granted. So let me switch gears here. That's kind of what we do and where things go. What about where some of the things come from? What about the imported goods, and what does that mean to my life, my family, your families? Let's get a little bit of a deeper understanding of the reliance we all have on some of the imports that come through our port every day. Perhaps today, before coming here this morning, you might have had a cup of coffee, or maybe a banana. But I don't think any of you thought, this coffee bean or that banana, how did it get here? It came through our port. When I was shaving this morning, getting ready, and I looked at that razor and I thought, our port. When I hit the machine for the coffee maker and those beans, I went beyond that and thought about the coffee maker, our port. Flipped on the news, the sports and the news that were on TV, our port. So I wonder how many of you today are wearing shirts or shoes that were made abroad. How did they get here? What kind of transportation did you today take to come here? Did you ride the bike? A subway? Did you have a car? Think about our port, because that's how most of them would have got here. Let's consider for a minute the journey those coffee beans or your shoes may have made, and we begin to see the complex nature of the global supply chain that supports our daily lifestyles. Are we taking that lifestyle for granted? Are we taking what comes through the port for granted? I'm not sure, but I am sure that every one of us in this room today are directly affected by our port. With this personal connection in mind, I hope to provide a bit of a perspective on the role of the port. When you think of our port and what passes through our many terminals, I encourage you to consider your daily routine and the hundreds of thousands of jobs and the trade activity, the billions of dollars, and begin to think of the global supply chain that contributes to your and my personal lifestyles. On the bigger picture, our board takes our nation-building responsibility very seriously. It's our mandate. It's our job. So our port is required to provide marine infrastructure to support Canada's trade and build that global supply chain in a safe, sustainable, and efficient way today and for the future. That's why through the hard work combined with the seasoned leadership and governance that I see in our board and working with you in a strategic, collaborative way, that we have made some remarkable achievements over the past few years. we've seen tremendous growth, we've seen increased activity, and we've seen an ever-increasing national reliance on our port. It's important that we're all looking ahead and thinking about that vision for our port here in Vancouver. I look around the room and I see many faces, more than a dozen, maybe 20. People that were involved in our Port 2050 scenario planning, 2050. We did a vision outlook for the future of this port in this harbor. Looking ahead, we brought stakeholders together to discuss and plan the common future. The involvement of yours is paramount to both our port's success and your nation's success. I believe that by working together, we can plan our future of this port to ensure that the next generation of Canadians enjoy the same economic prosperity and that international trade provides you and I hope future generations. So this brings me to my concluding point. Success in most cases is achieved through collaboration, working together. Our board of directors fully supports this teamwork and the collaborative approach of doing business here in our port. In order to grow our port, it has to be competitive. It has to be stable. It has to be safe. We believe in a culturally rich port, a beautiful port, and most importantly, a sustainable port. Just like any other collaboration, we'll get there by working through our challenges, coming to a common conclusion together, and create the best possible outcome for this great nation and for this Pacific Gateway. With that spirit of collaboration in mind, I thank each of you for your support, your opinions, your contributions to our future. And finally, I'd like to recognize another group that's here today, and if they're not here, I'd still like to pass on the key components of our port, our terminal operators, our railroads, our trucking, our men and women who come to work every day and make up our labor force. That's the operating team behind the structure that is continue to show the improving success of our port here in Vancouver. So again, thanks for showing up. I know you're here because you care, and I appreciate your support, and I'm glad that you care about our port, Vancouver. With that, and on behalf of our board of directors, I'd like to introduce Robin Sylvester, our Chief Executive Officer and President, to report on our 2014 activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Craig, and I'd like to add my welcome to our annual general meeting. It's great to see such a large turnout for the annual general meeting. Our Chief Financial Officer, Alan Bidala, will provide an overview of last year and of our financials. I want to focus on several topics of keen interest to us and the communities that we operate as part of. Before I do that, though, I want to highlight that 2014 was an extraordinary year on so many fronts. Growth in trade through the port broke records yet again. We completed well over 200 environmental reviews of proposed projects. We held and participated in hundreds of community events, and we certainly received unprecedented media attention and public attention. It was a challenging but very rewarding year in so many ways. As Craig mentioned, as a Canadian Port Authority, we have a mandate under the Canada Marine Act that requires us to focus primarily on three things. To support Canada's trade objectives by ensuring commercially viable port operations and safe, efficient transportation of goods. To provide a high level of environmental protection and to consider the input of communities. As you can imagine, these three goals don't always easily coexist. It's a balance we must work to strike every day, and it's a balance we must succeed in making. Canada's trade is growing. New trade agreements, increasing demand for our natural resources, growing Asian economies, and increasing demand here in Canada for goods manufactured overseas. Our job as a port authority is to respond to that growing demand and make sure the port is ready to handle it. So how do we do that? I want to share with you some examples. And I ask you to notice the thread that joins them all together, which Craig has already touched on repeatedly. It's the thread of collaboration. The Port Authority working with many others to address growing trade as responsively and responsibly as we can. On any given initiative, our partners could be terminal operators handling cargo, tenants leasing land, communities looking for infrastructure improvements, emergency responders planning for incident response, environmental organizations researching marine ecosystems, the business community looking to grow market share, or government wanting to advance a policy or implement a new regulation. It's hard to come up with even a single example that doesn't involve working with someone outside our organization. First and foremost, our operations must serve Canada's trade objectives by being commercially viable, efficient, and safe. Commercially viable means at no cost to taxpayers, since unlike our US competitors who are supported by local municipal taxes, Canadian port authorities rely on the revenue they generate from rent. Commercially viable also means for those who use and invest in our gateway. They must get efficient, competitive services and be able to earn a return on the capital they invest. In 2014, we completed or neared completion of several large infrastructure projects that increased capacity, improved safety and efficiency, and minimized impacts on host communities. For example, the new low-level road project on the North Shore, a project in partnership with federal, provincial, and municipal governments and with TransLink, providing better separation of road and rail traffic, allowing for more safe and efficient movement of trains, commuters, pedestrians, and cyclists. As with all projects, there was some opposition at the start, for sure. But now the project's complete, the accolades speak for themselves, and we know it has improved the quality of life on the North Shore. These and other improvements throughout the gateway have given the private sector the confidence to invest in growth and development. Collectively, in recent years, we've seen about $9 billion invested in the region to support growing trade. We are now working with others on the next wave of improvements. In 2014, we led the creation of the Gateway Transportation Collaboration Forum. With Transport Canada, the province of BC, TransLink, and the Greater Vancouver Gateway Council all participating alongside us, we are identifying and prioritizing new infrastructure projects that will ensure trade can continue to flow smoothly for years to come, while also minimizing the impacts on local communities. Let me turn to another example of how efficient and safe operations are a product of collaboration. One of our greatest challenges in 2014 was the labor disruption by container truck drivers in February and March, just over a year ago. Reliability is a port's best advertisement, and any disruption or even threat of disruption can cause immediate and long-lasting loss of business, which greatly impacts local workers and companies, large and small. To resolve the problem, our goal was to end undercutting by trucking companies that left drivers unable to earn a living wage. Together with the federal and provincial governments, we've reached a point where we are now seeing stability. It's been an incredible amount of work, but we are now becoming a model for port authorities all around the world that struggle with similar issues in the container trucking sector. So let's move on to the second pillar of our legislative mandate, environmental protection. First, we need to truly understand what it means to be sustainable. In 2014, we led a process to develop a definition of sustainability for the Vancouver Gateway. It extends well beyond just the Port Authority, and we hope our terminal partners and others who helped us derive the definition will pursue it as wholeheartedly as we are. And seeing the focus on sustainability all around the Gateway, I have no doubt that they will. Our definition of sustainability has three parts: economic prosperity, environmental protection, and thriving communities. You can read more about it in our 2014 sustainability report, which is being released today. But let me give you a few of the environmental highlights. Canadian port authorities have environmental decision-making responsibilities, and we must first be assured that any project on federal land is not likely to cause significant adverse environmental impacts before we can approve that project in our jurisdiction. In 2014, as I touched on earlier, we conducted about 265 environmental reviews. We reviewed proponents' project plans and required environmental mitigations and strategies as conditions for project approval. The most challenging review was probably the Fraser Surrey Docks coal transfer permit. This project was the subject of unprecedented levels of public interest. Frankly, we were caught off guard by that, particularly given that coal has been for a long time the port's largest export, and thermal coal has moved through this port for decades. The experience, though, taught us a lot. Transparency and public trust are essential, and we're making improvements to our permitting process to address this. Canadian port authorities do not have the legal jurisdiction to decide what products Canada trades, only to ensure whatever is traded safely, efficiently, and sustainably. We understand there are those who would like us to take a stand on certain commodities or on issues such as climate change. While we have no authority over national trade or climate change policies, what we can do and do is minimize the environmental footprint of port operations. Our environmental team is comprised of around 15 experts in biology, air quality, atmospheric science, chemistry, soil science, geology, sustainability, energy management, and overall environmental management systems. They work with our tenants, terminals, and others to reduce air emissions, reduce electricity use, improve and create wildlife habitat, minimize noise impacts, and much more to ensure the environmental sustainability of the port. In addition, a separate project team over the past 4 years commissioned 77 different scientific studies that have been conducted to inform our environmental impact statement for the proposed new container terminal near Delta Port, the Roberts Bank Terminal 2. Roberts Bank is now likely one of the most studied ecosystems in Canada. Our research has contributed to a large body of knowledge that is being broadly shared. These studies have led us to conclude Terminal 2 can be built with mitigation firmly in place and will result in no adverse impacts to the environment. It is now up to an independent panel to assess our report and make a recommendation to the Federal Minister of the Environment. The work done to prepare the environmental impact statement for Terminal 2 also led us to establish an important new mitigation program. Our research highlighted something that is already well known, that human population growth and marine traffic of all kinds in our region, including port traffic, ferries, whale-watching vessels, and pleasure boats, are impacting the southern resident killer whale population. This risk and impact exists with or without Terminal 2. To better understand the cumulative impacts of all shipping activities on whales throughout the southern coast of British Columbia, and to inform mitigation solutions, we established the ECHO program, which stands for Enhancing Cetacean Habitat and Observation Program. Our solution was to seek early input and advice through a collaborative working group comprised of government agencies, First Nations representatives, shipping industry, environmental and conservation organizations, and scientists. One of the projects we are pursuing is the use of innovative Canadian-developed hydrophone technology so we can be sure we are getting the information needed to define and take appropriate action. We are providing initial funding and exploring opportunities for further funding from government and industry. We are also excited about our work in air quality. Did you know that air quality related to port activities is actually improving? That's because of the regulatory requirements and financial incentives that have been put in place, in part by us, to encourage the use of low sulfur fuels, to encourage shore power for cruise ships, and to have increasingly stringent environmental requirements for truck engines, for trucks serving the port. I could go on and on about our various environmental programs, and you will find information about many of them in our sustainability report. Suffice it to say that our environmental team is absolutely devoted to making sure that we do what we do responsibly and for the long term, a value shared throughout our organization, and I'm extremely proud of the work we do. And finally, returning to our mandate, I want to touch on the third of our 3 pillars, consideration for local communities. The port is critical to Canada. $1 in every 5 of goods traded by this nation is traded in goods moving through this port. We are by far the largest port in Canada. All of us, including the 16 lower mainland municipalities and several First Nations that we border, and the many others through which trains and trucks travel, all share in hosting a system that is absolutely imperative to the well-being of Canada and, most importantly, of Canadians. However, hosting all this port-related infrastructure means there are some impacts. Our role is to minimize those impacts by informing, engaging, and collaborating with communities and local governments to develop best options and reasonable mitigations. To build on our shared interests in environmental protection and economic development, we actively engage with Aboriginal communities to seek their involvement in the future growth, operation, and stewardship of the port. In addition, We have a municipal engagement team that meets with local governments regularly and manages our 3 community liaison committees. We engage, consult, and allow for public input. We always incorporate public feedback into our plans to the extent we can and it makes sense. In 2014, we completed our land use plan, similar to a municipality's community plan. We consulted for 2 years with over 1,000 people. The requirement in the Canada Marine Act is to conduct a single public meeting. Speaking of planning for the future, in 2014, we revisited, as Craig said, our Port 2050 scenarios. Originally developed in 2010, the scenarios are 4 very long-term views of how the port might evolve. Last year, we brought stakeholders together again to provide an updated vision of the port, one that provides for Canada's ongoing trade growth, but does in a way that is sustainable and maintains the lifestyle and environment we all so much appreciate living here in the Lower Mainland. Port 2050 provides the long-term perspective for the port. Our annual planning cycle sets goals that form our annual corporate scorecard. Each month, we evaluate ourselves against that scorecard and other metrics to ensure we're staying on track for that long-term vision. So there you have it, a quick overview of our mandate to facilitate trade in a sustainable way with consideration for local communities, and a few examples of how we are fulfilling our federal purpose as a port authority with a very high level of stakeholder involvement. So I'd like to turn to some of the challenges we see on the horizon. When I reflect on the largest issues we are currently managing, there are 3 that immediately come to mind. The first is the shortage of industrial land here in the Lower Mainland. We have been sounding the alarm on this serious issue for well over 2 years now. Quite simply, we, and by we, I don't just mean the port, I mean we in the Lower Mainland, are running out of industrial land. Any business that is involved in trade or any industry, anyone that relies on the port, is going to be very challenged to find suitable space to operate in the near future. We estimate that all available industrial land will be depleted within the next decade. What does that mean? It means warehouses and logistics hubs will go elsewhere, like Alberta and the US. We will lose the opportunity for jobs in a region that is already facing an affordability crisis. Goods will be more expensive. We are certainly, as the port, continuing to maximize the use of the land we have, and many of the tenants here in the room today as well are doing a fantastic job of exactly that. And we are calling on governments at all levels to work together to address this problem. Secondly, and in some ways related, I'm concerned about our relationship with the 16 different municipalities that we work with. We serve Canada's trade interests, and that doesn't always jive with the way individual municipalities see themselves evolving. As with everything else, our solution is to try and find common ground and shared goals that will move us forward. The reality is we must coexist, and we as the port would much rather do that in the spirit of cooperation, creativity, and camaraderie. And thirdly, I want to return to the theme of environmental protection, and in particular, prevention and protection against spills in our waters. Our national spill response regime was tested in English Bay recently, as I have no doubt everyone in this room is aware. And while the cleanup was done extremely well, there were clearly some causes for concern and some opportunities for learning. We as the port are reiterating our call alongside industry stakeholders that we made 2 years ago to the Tanker Safety Panel for spill response on the West Coast to be fully resourced. We all live here, we know what we love best about living here, and you can rest assured that we as the port are taking a firm stance on the need for improvement. So coming back to our thread of collaboration, I'm convinced that these and other challenges we face can be addressed if we work together. And there's a story I wanted to tell that was actually told by Steve Jobs that provides a great metaphor for the art of collaboration. He talked of being a young boy and visiting an elderly man that lived up the street, who was invited to come and have a look at an old rock tumbler. Nothing more than a coffee can with a motor and a band linking the two of them. They got some rocks, just regular old lumps of stone, put them in the can with a bit of water and some grit powder, closed the can and turned on the motor. There was a hell of a noise, and it went on. And the man said, "Okay, come back tomorrow." The next day, what they took out of the can was a set of beautifully polished rocks. Steve Jobs apparently used this story as a metaphor for a team working really hard on something they're passionate about. A group of dedicated people bumping up against each other, having arguments sometimes, making noise, and working together. In the end, they improve each other and their ideas. What comes out are the beautiful stones. The story reminds me of what all of us do every day, working together as we do. So to close, our organization is certainly dynamic. We negotiate leases, monitor safety, manage risks, design and create everything from habitat to infrastructure, build relationships with First Nations, governments, stakeholders, tenants, communities, shippers, customers, plan, forecast, and evaluate, communicate, and call for action. In closing, I want to acknowledge 3 groups critical to our success. First, our terminal operators, their employees, labor, and other tenants who continue to make the port the most important to Canada's trade. We may not always agree on the details, but we certainly are collectively totally committed to Canada's prosperity as a trading nation. Secondly, I want to thank our diverse group of board members who provide wise counsel and are dedicated to serving our organization and our country. And lastly, I want to thank our employees. 2014 was a very, very busy year, as hopefully you get a sense of from my brief remarks. And I think we've all come to realize within the organization, it's done nothing but set a new normal for us. I've never before worked with such an inspiring group, driven and intent on doing their best. Ours is a challenging role, but we're proud to do it. And I hope all of them share that pride, and all of you can share in that pride as well. So I thank you for your attention and support, and I'd like to ask now Alan Bedala, our Chief Financial Officer, to provide a financial overview. Alan.
Thank you, Robin, and good afternoon. I'm pleased today to be able to present Port Metro Vancouver's 2014 financial report. It combines our audited financial statements with our management discussion and analysis. The report highlights our ability to deliver results, providing an overview and analysis of our business operations and financial results. Further to both Craig's and Robin's reference to our mandate, I'll show how, through our financials, we are meeting the requirement to support trade in a sustainable way with regard to local communities. Supporting Canada's trade means, among other things, making sure related infrastructure is in place to accommodate it. Our financial report and capital plan demonstrate our intention to do just that and ensure that future generations continue to enjoy the benefits of trade, a healthy environment, and thriving communities. Before I share the results, I'll give some general context on how the Port Authority generates revenues and how revenues are spent and reinvested. As Robin mentioned, unlike many port authorities around the world, Canadian port authorities do not collect taxes, nor do we receive any tax dollars. Canadian port authorities manage terminal and tenant leases, collecting rents, and charge ship and cargo owners various fees, such as harbor dues, berthage, and wharfage. And to give you a couple of examples of our commitment to sustainability, we charge terminals a fee for their use of older diesel equipment and provide a rebate when they upgrade to newer, lower emission vehicles. And last year, we rebated $1 million in harbor dues to vessels going beyond regulatory requirements to reduce emissions. Port Metro Vancouver revenues are spent on port-related activities such as safety and security, reliability and efficiency initiatives, Fraser River dredging, environmental reviews, community engagement, consultation, and investment, and many other activities carried out to fulfill our mandate. We also need and plan for surplus revenues, which are reinvested in infrastructure and other capital projects to support our responsibility to facilitate Canada's trade in a sustainable way. And so I'm pleased to report on a number of project milestones for Port Metro Vancouver in 2014. Our total capital expenditures have increased 2% to $97 million from $95 million in 2013, which excludes the $56 million we invested in the Fraser Wharves acquisition in that year. We substantially completed on schedule and within budget 5 major projects, including the new low-level road and Spirit Trail in North Vancouver, the South Shore Trade Area projects, which among other things directly addressed public road access and noise, the Powell Street Overpass, a joint venture with the City of Vancouver, 232nd Street Overpass in Langley, and the Delta Port Overpass to allow free movement of trucks and trains. We continue to lead various projects to accommodate expected increases in container, break bulk, and bulk trade. These projects include the Delta Port Terminal Road and Rail Improvement Project and the proposed Roberts Bank Terminal 2 project, as well as additional projects on the North and South Shores and the Fraser River trade area. We're ensuring we are ready as Canada takes advantage of continuing and growing global trade opportunities. Now, turning to our financial results. Much of the strength of our financials is due to having very diverse trading partners and cargo sectors, as well as an excellent balance between imports and exports. 2014 was another record year for cargo through the port. Volume through port terminals have grown continuously since 2009, experiencing 3 consecutive record-breaking years. Last year, 140 million tons of cargo, up by 3% over the previous year, moved through the terminals in our port. To put that in context, my son owns a Ford F-350 pickup truck, a 1-ton pickup. If you lined up such trucks bumper to bumper, filled with 140 million tons of cargo, you would circle the earth about 23 times. That's a lot of volume, and it's a good thing it's moving in ships. I want to acknowledge and congratulate all our tenants and terminals on another record year. Your confidence in this port and your work to ensure efficient operations are so critical to Vancouver's international reputation as a reliable port in which to do business. So this increase in cargo volume resulted in a 6% increase in revenues to $223 million and a similar increase in total comprehensive income to $98 million in 2014. We're proud to announce that our Standard & Poor's AA credit rating was again reaffirmed in 2014. With the future and long-term planning in mind, our 5-year capital plan identifies $1 billion of spending to support our strategic priorities. A full overview of our financials is available in our 2014 financial report, available on our website. The consolidated financial statements in our report were audited externally by Ernst & Young. The auditors are of the opinion that the consolidated financial statements present fairly, in all material respects, the financial position of the Port Authority as of December 31st, 2014, and its financial performance and cash flow for the year then ended in accordance with international financial accounting standards. Earlier this afternoon, our Board of Directors reappointed Ernst & Young as auditors for the Port Authority. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our customers and stakeholders for their continued support, our Board of Directors for their guidance, and our employees who work hard to deliver solid results and ensure the Port Authority maintains its strong financial position. We look forward to achieving many more milestones in 2015 in all areas of our mandate and continuing to invest in support of sustainable growth for future generations. Thank you.